Namaste everyone. In today's video, we're going to focus on Muni Patanjali's Yoga Sutra 2.50. Now in this Yoga Sutra, Muni Patanjali is helping us to understand the three different varieties or kinds of pranayama practices and what the impact of these practices is. So let's take a good look at the sutra, start breaking it up word by word and understanding it a little bit better. So the sutra itself goes Bhahyabhyantara stambha vrittir desha kala sankhya bihif paridrishto dirgha sukshmaha. Alright, so this is the sutra itself. Now let's take a look at each of the words and start understanding them a little bit better. The first word here is Bahya. And Bahya usually refers to something that's on the outside or outward. So even in Hindi, when we say somebody's outside, we say Bahar. So this word or this root comes from the same meaning, which means outward. Then coming to the next word, there is Abhyantara. And this basically means inward or something that is more internal. So Bahya Bhyantara, inward, internal. And it also sometimes is pronounced as Abhyantara. So entirely depends on which section of the sutra you're looking at, but it basically means inward. Then coming to the next word, we have Stambha. Now Stambha refers to something that is reduced or stopped or motionless. So an in-between motionless stage. And then coming to the next word, which is Vritti. Now, vritti is a word that we've heard very often in the first chapter, but here it's talking about essentially a mode of behavior or a mode of doing something. So it's not referring to the thought wave, the chitta vritti, it's referring to a vritti in this particular case, which is a mode of a particular way of doing something. So that is vritti. Then coming to the next section of the sutra, talks about a few more words which characterize the pranayama practice. The first one being desha. Now this, we've also learned it much earlier, refers to the region, the expanse, a particular space. And then the next word refers to kala. And kala again means time. Alright, so very common word, kala means time. Then coming to the next one, it's Sankhya. And Sankhya refers to the number of rounds something is done in. So the number of times, or in when we work out, the number of reps in a way. So basically just the number of times something is repeated. And then the next word here is Bihi. So we have Kala Sankhya Bihi, which over here refers to by means of. So it's another word just to combine the previous terms all together and kind of give it some grammatical sense by saying by means of. And then coming to the next, we have paridrishta or paridrishto, as is given in the sutra. So this basically means something that is measured, regulated, seen as in a certain way. So it's talking about the measurement process. And then finally we come to a compound word over here, which is dirgha sukshmaha. Now dirgha refers to something very long, prolonged, and sukshmaha refers to something that is very subtle. So these are the meanings of all the words. Now let's take a basic understanding of what is the sutra saying, and then we'll go deeper into what is this entire thing about. So basically we're being told that pranayama has three main varieties. One is the outward kind, second is the inward kind, third is the kind where there's pause or cessation in breathing, and after that, once we define the pranayama in that way, it can further be defined through the desha, through the kala, which is the region, the time, as well as the sankhya, which is the number of times it is repeated. And through this entire practice and process, what happens as a result is the breath becomes highly prolonged and very fine and subtle. So this is the basic meaning of the sutra, but now let's get deeper into it and start understanding it a little bit further. Alright, so now that we've understood the sutra, let's understand what it was trying to teach us. Essentially, we have learned that pranayama has three main varieties. The fourth variety is talked about in the next sutra, which is 1.51. So in this one, we're dealing with the top three varieties. Now, these modes of pranayama practice are very unique. The first one is the ABHYANTARA, which essentially means where the breathing practice is made slow and prolonged, specifically on the exhalation. So what exactly is being done to the inhalation in this practice is not very clear, as we're talking more of the exhalation, but one would assume that even that needs to be as slow and as subtle as possible. However, the emphasis, of course, is more on the exhalation. So bahya. Then number two, we come to abhyantara. Here, the emphasis is more on the inhalation. So the way in which we're inhaling is more long, more deep, and more subtle. And the emphasis is placed on that region. Whereas the exhalation is not as focused upon, although it should still continue to be slow and steady. And finally, of course, we have STAMBHA, which refers to a deep sort of pause in the breath. And once again, over here, we have to be clear that it's not necessarily always a KUMBHAKA which is being spoken about, but rather just deep pauses and slow and steady movements of the breath, which can either be at the exhalation, at the inhalation, between both. So again, there hasn't been a very clear definition of where STAMBHA comes in, but it's separate from bahya and antara. So it's given here as a third variety where the sadhak can now apply gentle pauses or just slow down the breath overall to create pauses in the breath. So this is bahya, antara and stambha vritti. Now, something very important to keep in mind over here is that the fourth variety talks more deeply about the kumbhak and the specifics associated to that. And therefore, clearly, these three varieties are not specific to a kumbhak. They're talking more about general, slow, steady, and relaxed breathing, which is pranayamic breath. So, very important to keep this in mind, because we might think, oh, is this a kumbhak? Like, am I supposed to take a deep breath in and then apply a kumbhak? So that's not what's being said in this particular sutra. Where if we're saying bahya bhyantara vritti, then in that case it's a mode of breathing, which means the focus is on the exhalation. It doesn't mean that after you exhale you need to pause. Alright, so just trying to keep those differences and those key points in mind as we study these sutras on the pranayama. Now, once we have understood this, we come to the next segment of the sutra, which is talking to us much more deeply about how to kind of measure or understand each round of pranayama better. So the first option which is given here is desha, which means region. Now here specifically, they're talking about the region or the impact up to which the breath is felt. How? So here now, when we're exhaling, for example, if we take bahya bhyantara vritti, when we exhale, the impact of how deep the exhalation is can be felt if we keep our hands or we keep a few fingers here and you exhale deeply. You can feel the flow of breath to your hand. But when you're breathing quickly, the movement of breath is not that deep, so you don't feel the expanse across your body region. So this is a very important thing to keep in mind, that how deep you're breathing can be measured in the way in which your breath reacts on the exhale and then also on the inhale. So now when you're inhaling, and you're mentally sitting there, you may not be able to feel it with your hands, but internally you will be able to process the depth of how far deep is your inhalation reaching. And so that also shows you how deeply you have inhaled. And that is a good indicator of the depth and the type of breath that you're breathing. Now, very important to keep this in mind because the inhalation one especially is a more mental process. We can't put our hands there and kind of see how far the breath is reaching. But we can use the mental capacity to take a judgment call on how deep the desha goes and how much of a region is being covered by that, movement of the breath. So that is what we call desha. Now, of course, in the case of stambha vritti, if there are pauses, we may not be able to experience the, movement of the breath. So it may not be as applicable in that case, but definitely in the exhalation and the inhalation, it is more obvious, and we can actually sort of measure the depth of the breath using these examples to help us. Now, moving to the next one, which is kala. And kala refers to time. So this is very important because how much time we spend on each of the inhalation, the exhalation is very important, as we are, expected to do it for a longer period of time. So kala can be measured through the number of seconds, through how much time it takes us, and how we go through the entire process. Now, a very important thing here to keep in mind is that in Hatha Yoga, we are introduced to terms such as Purak, Kumbhak and Rechak. Purak means inhalation, Kumbhak means retention, and Rechak means exhalation, according to the Hatha Yogic tradition and practice. However, in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, if you notice, none of these terms have been mentioned. So, when we're looking at the amount of time for which we are doing the pranayama practice, a measure of seconds might be an easier way than to consider the ratios of Purak, Kumbhak and Rechak, which usually, as given by Hatha Yogic texts, are 1:4:2. This is the most commonly given Hatha Yogic breathing ratio. However, in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, there is no such mention of ratios or even of the words Purak, Rechak and Kumbhak, and therefore it's better to just adjust it with your understanding of time itself than to go with the ratios when you're following the Patanjali Yoga system. So this is a recommendation given by a lot of commentators because some of these, systems of yoga are different, especially between Hatha Yoga and Patanjali Yoga. There are some subtle and minor differences that we need to keep in mind. And then finally, of course, we come to Sankhya, the number of rounds of the practice. And here, of course, depending on how we define a single round, we can actually measure it based on how many times we inhaled, how many times we exhaled, how frequent that practice was. And that'll help us to better understand the number of times we have conducted a particular pranayama practice. So these are some ways in which we can better measure the practice. Once again, desha, region, kala, time, and sankhya, the number of rounds. So this is what the sutra says. And finally, it gives us a very clear indication with the last two words, dirgha sukshmaha, which says that the impact of doing pranayama in this way will be that the breath becomes very slow, long, and subtle. So this is an important thing to keep in mind because the breath should become finer, slower, and deeper. And if that's not happening as yet, then maybe we need to go backwards, check what we've kind of missed out on, fix those things, and continue forward, constantly moving towards deeper, subtler, and finer breathing practices. So this is what Muni Patanjali has explained through this particular sutra about the pranayama practices. I hope this has been an informative sutra. Please do let us know what you think, how you felt about the sutra in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and also subscribe to our channel because we release new videos every single week. We look forward now to seeing you in the next video or in our next class, course or workshop, the links for which are all in the description. We look forward to seeing you in the next one. Until then, take care and we'll see you very soon. Namaste.